Thank you to our trio of foreign ministers here, David Cameron of the UK, Annalena Baerbock from Germany, and Radek Sikorski of Poland. We only have about 40 minutes, which, given the state of the world today, is definitely not long enough. Plus, I want to take a few questions at the end. So I think we'll jump straight in. Annalena, I wanted to start with you. Tomorrow marks the second anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You've just come here, I think, along with David, from the G20 in Brazil, where I'm told you were sat at a table with Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia. You've called for an end to the war in Ukraine. Can you tell us what needs to happen for that to be a reality?
Well, it's very simple and easy. Putin has to withdraw his tanks, has to stop bombing schools and hospitals, and then the world would be free again and the war would be over. And this is what we told the Russian foreign minister very directly, not only David and I, but everybody at the table. Maybe not all 19 other G20 members directly in his face, but we can really see a change in the world. 2 years ago, when there was a G20 meeting directly after this horrible invasion of Russia to Ukraine, I mean, we had a debate at this table. The fake news, the lies being spread by Putin were all around the table, blaming NATO, blaming us, blaming Ukraine, that they would have started this war. This is all over. Yeah? This is all over. The whole world has suffered. The whole world has experienced that this is a war not only against Ukraine, not only against the European peace order, but it's a war against the Charter of the United Nations. And the poorest in the world are feeling the effects. So we are crystal clear. Obviously, he has to withdraw. Unfortunately, we see that he's leading the war not only against Ukraine, against his own people, like we saw, killing Navalny, now arresting Russian teenagers, his own children who mourn for Navalny. So obviously, he is not acting in a way human beings would act in this kind of situation, responsible leadership would act. So to your question coming back, how would it end? It would be simple if Russia would end this war now. They have started it, but as they are not doing it, the only option for us is to keep up our support as we have done the last 2 years for Ukraine so they can defend themselves and make it clear that we will never give up for a free and peaceful Ukraine.
So, David, you were there as well. Did you detect any change from Lavrov, any sort of chink?
No, I mean, he looked completely shamefaced when, Annalena did a great job of absolutely eyeballing him and addressing him directly, and I did the same thing. They just are shamefaced. He mumbled through his script about what was happening in the world without any confidence at all. And as Annalena said, he was attacked from not just us, but also the Canadians, the French, others. And I think people can see that there's no excuse. When you look back now, 2 years in, there was just no excuse. Yeah. The excuse, what I said in my contribution was, well, which one is it? Are they Nazis or are they brothers? Is it a country that doesn't exist, or is it an existential threat? How can something that doesn't exist be a threat? How can people be Nazis when you're acting like Nazis and taking someone else's country and hoping the world doesn't notice? So the arguments are so strong. The frustration I think we all have is that add up our economies and we outmatch Russia 25-1. We've got to make that difference count. And one of the reasons for being here, not only at the United Nations, but here in the United States, is the US can make the biggest difference, has made a huge difference, but can make an even bigger difference. And my appeal would be, look, of course this is about Ukraine's security, and of course it's about Europe's security, but it's also about your security. We know, in 2 ways. One, we know from history that if we allow dictators in Europe to take territory, redraw boundaries by force, the cost ultimately to America in terms of lives and money gets higher and higher the longer you put off really leaning in and helping. And the second thing is, if we fail, it's not just Putin that's celebrating, it's Xi Jinping, it's Iran, it's North Korea. And so American security and the future of American security is very much on the line as well.
So there's obviously this tremendous debate going on in America at the moment. There's an election coming. Radek, I was going to ask you, what would your message be to skeptical Americans who say they don't see the case for spending their taxpayers' money on defending Ukraine, as David was saying? What would you say to them vis-a-vis this aid package, which isn't making any progress? given that as well, the Ukrainians pointed directly to their lack of ammunition when they lost their town, this key eastern town of Advika.
Well, I'd say the following. Since Vladimir Putin now says we are the enemy, we didn't want that, but he's treating us as the enemy. The defensive war that Ukrainians are fighting is really good value for money for the United States. Without sacrificing a single American soldier, for the price of 3-4% of an annual US defense budget, the Ukrainians have already destroyed half the Russian army. It's a good deal for the United States. Plus, Europe has already ordered something like $90 billion worth of new equipment from the United States since the war, because we're worried. And remember that something like 70% of the money that would go into this supplemental would be spent in the United States on American equipment. Plus, there is the issue of American credibility. The US president went to Kiev, planted the standard of the United States and said, we will back you for as long as it takes. We'll do whatever it takes. And words have consequences. If the United States doesn't go through, your allies all around the world will notice.
What's the atmosphere, Annalena? I was going to ask you, what's the atmosphere like in Europe at the moment? Because it may not be probable, but it is possible that, under a new presidency, America steps away from NATO. Europe then, what would then happen? To what extent could Europe go it alone vis-a-vis Ukraine?
Well, I'm not a fan of talking things down, if this is a correct English saying, but because, we are here, I can only underline what my colleagues and friends have said. We are defending not only Ukraine, we are defending the European peace order as Europeans, obviously, but also as NATO countries and also as a free world. We, as a free world, are defending freedom in the world. We're defending the Charter of the United Nations. And as David had put it already, we're in a situation of a fight between liberal democracies and autocracies, between dictators which do not want to negotiate about new treaties or negotiate about a new international order. They want to destroy the international order. And this is why we have to stand united. And I'm a bit reluctant, even though I underline everything what has been said about kindly pushing on our dearest friend, because we have been in a similar situation. Yeah, when this war broke out, obviously many people also here from the other side of the Atlantic said, so where's Germany? Can you do more? So I know how it feels like. However, I must say this is now the situation. I think Europe has delivered. Yeah, even with our dearest European friends, which are not part, unfortunately, of the European Union anymore, we have made clear there's no inch between neither the 27 of the European Union. Okay, sometimes we discuss with one of the European Union, but we have made crystal clear, no matter where we disagree on other topics, nuclear, trade issues, on this question, there's nothing between us. And it goes the same with the Brits. Yeah, we had discussions, obviously, as well, but there's no discussion that we stand united. And this is our strength. And it was now for 2 years our strength also between the Atlantic. Never before. I was born in Germany, West, always in freedom and democracy. NATO in Germany, in my family, I'm from a Green Party, I made a joke, like when I came into office and now being part also as important NATO meetings, well, hopefully everybody in my families can support it. Then the Russian invasion in Ukraine started. And suddenly, one of my daughters said at the breakfast table a couple of weeks later, Mom, thanks God we do have NATO. I was like, oh, don't tell your grandfather, yeah? But he obviously also changed totally his course. Many politicians, people in Germany changed course because they know not only European Union has been our life insurance in the last decades, NATO is our life insurance. And this is so, I totally agree with everybody here. US has to stay with us in their own interest, but also in the interest of the free world.
Yeah.
Poland is the only country in the EU and NATO that has Russia and Ukraine as neighbors. We are closer, and therefore we feel this crisis more keenly. And what I would add to what Annalena said is that we do need a greater sense of urgency. Ukraine is outgunned. In the Battle of Avdiivka, estimates are between 7 and 8 to 1 in artillery capability. The Ukrainians are fighting like lions, but you cannot fight with bare hands. They are running out of ammunition for anti-aircraft missiles that are protecting Ukrainian cities. And when soldiers don't have artillery shells, they have to do close combat fighting. That means the Ukrainian casualties are greater. Every shell that we deliver to Ukraine urgently will save lives. That's why we need this American supplemental as soon as possible.
Yes, and what about, what about long-range missiles though? Because I know France and the UK have delivered long-range missiles, and the Ukrainians would like them from Germany too.
I think it's one of the biggest game changers, because the ability of the Ukrainians to show that Crimea is under threat completely undermines Putin's narrative that somehow things are moving in his direction. And that's what the long range, whether it's the Storm Shadow, whether it's the French Scalp, or whether it's the American ATACMS, makes a huge difference. So I think those weapons, Radek's right, there's a shell point, which is they need 6,000 a day, and they've got 2,000 a day, so we've got to fix that. But these long-range weapons that help take the fight right to Crimea, which is part of Ukraine's territory, make a huge difference. We've done it. We're obviously working with allies to try and make them do more. I'll just make one other point on the NATO front, which perhaps helps in the American debate, and maybe on both sides of the aisle, which is that one of the things that's happened is NATO has got a lot stronger. The fact that Sweden and Finland are joining, got two highly capable countries. Finland's capable of putting almost 1 million people under arms because of the history that they've had and the training they've done. Sweden has got great capabilities from Saab and Gripen aircraft and all the rest of it. So if you think about it from either presidential candidate, you're investing now in a stronger NATO, a better NATO, where many more members have reached 2% and are going beyond 2%. And you talk to the Baltic states, they're going way higher than that. So I think it's investing and joining in something that's successful. And while, of course, we look at Advika and have our concerns about that, zoom out a bit and you can see the Ukrainians have sunk 20% of the Russian Black Sea fleet. They pushed the Russians right back in the Black Sea. They're exporting again. They're going to export their entire 23 grain harvest. They've taken about half the territory that Putin took when he invaded 2 years ago. And with these long-range weapons, they can threaten Crimea. So I think, one can paint a different picture of the way things are going. And with that, if the US makes that decision, I think we can really change the terms of trade over the course of this year.
And so obviously this situation has accelerated the the defence spending of a lot of European NATO countries. Do you think it's also going to accelerate moves towards a single European defence force? Because there is a lack of coordination still in Europe amongst different armies. Radek?
I think it's unhelpful to talk about a single European army, because that will not happen. When you were fighting the British for independence, you created the Continental Army rather than joined up the state militias, right? So we need a European defense capability in addition to the national armies, and we have plans to create a reinforced brigade. It's a good beginning. What we really, really need urgently now is to supplement the European defense budget, which is wonderfully called the European Peace Facility. We've spent 7 billion from it on the assistance to Ukraine, but we've spent that money. We need another 5 billion this year, and I hope it will happen.
I just want to go back to Putin. Obviously, you mentioned this horrible news that he had Navalny killed. Last week, there was news that he'd had a Russian dissident shot dead in Spain. You, David, know only too well he has no shame in sending assassins to the UK to poison people. No. He's running amok, not just in his own country, but in the rest of Europe. He also betrays weakness too. My question is, how much longer are we going to stand back and let him run amok like this? Basically, he's destroyed things as we know it in Europe. He's killing people with impunity. How can we stop him? I don't know which one of you
Well,
wants to
I think
answer that.
you've got to think of all the different aspects of combating Russia. Not Russia, because we have no quarrel with the Russian people, but combating Putin. And obviously there's the military side we've been talking about. I think to be truthful, I remember Obama coming to the EU and saying, you're not doing enough to combat Russian disinformation in the Balkans and elsewhere. I think we have woken up to that, and a lot more is being done on every front, whether it's sanctioning the Russians who are behind Navalny's death, which Britain went first on, and America is doing that, I think, this week, whether it is countering misinformation in the Balkans and elsewhere, whether it's making sure we're checking on how Russians are trying to affect our politics or affect political parties and media. I think there's a lot sharper operation going on today than there was in the past.
But the sanctions, I mean, a whole load more were unveiled this morning by Biden, but to be honest, the sanctions aren't really having much of an effect at the moment, are they? I mean, isn't there more, Annalena, that the West could do to sanction Putin?
Well, there is way more. We have 13 sanction packages passed, but nobody believed. I mean, again, we are not talking about political leaders in a democracy where you run down your economy, then voters would say, well, they didn't do great, next time we vote for somebody else. I mean, for logic of democracies, yeah, what Putin has done to his own country, he would be out of office after 2 days. So nobody from us, when we started with the sanctions, believed that the sanction package would stop this kind of invasion, yeah. But sanctions are important. We are showing the world, we are showing to the Putin regime, to the people around them, to those who voted in the Duma for this war, those who are responsible for kidnapping children, that the breach of fundamental law is not only seen in the world, that it's being sanctioned. And yes, unfortunately, it will take time also with the effects, yeah? Especially, I mean, there are the charges with the International Criminal Law Court. One day, they will be held responsible for that. And this is very important. And this comes in addition to, obviously, the military support. So it's obviously not only the sanction, but the sanctions show also to countries in the world, to companies. I mean, you can just not cooperate with a dictator like that. Yeah, so the effects are also important for others. I would like to underline what, again, my friends have said on the question of defense and on the question of strength. I mean, we are not letting Putin go away with poisoning either in the UK or killing somebody in the Tiergarten in Berlin. We are acting on that one. And also from the military side, sorry for coming back to that, but I think it's important. I mean, Putin believes he can wait us out. And we shouldn't give an impression also in a debate like this that this is true. No, we stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. And what Radek has says, this is, my chancellor called it Zeitenwende, obviously, that we deliver weapons towards Ukraine. This is our Zeitenwende. But it's plural. They are Zeitenwenden in plural. There are more Zeitenwenden. That we are working now on strengthening the European pillar within the NATO. This is, again, another kind of revolution for us, that we are setting up not only the European Peace Facility to support Ukraine, but that we are having common tenders to actually build a European defense industry. At the moment, unfortunately, we are very much competing against each other. We have realized in Ukraine, when we delivered weapons, that it doesn't help that we share howitzers, Germany and Dutch, because they don't work perfectly together in the field, that we have to produce these kind of military support, then do common production like ammunition we are doing right now. So Europe is getting not only stronger, NATO is getting stronger on that way, and we will follow up on that one again as long as it takes. And this was a total miscalculation of Putin. I mean, Putin believed he had the uniforms in his tanks where he could celebrate after 2 months conquering Kiev. And everything was ruined on that one. And this is why, I mean, politics is always about, is the glass half empty or half full? Yeah? And I think true leadership is that you're seeing it is half full, and you're working on every drip in the glass that it's even getting fuller. And this is what we are doing right now with 13 sanction packages, with an increase of our military support, 50 billion by the European Union, 30 billion alone by Germany, and not to forget, with a support of economic recovery conference in London, now in Berlin, and the support for the people. I mean, 4 million refugees have come to Europe. We gave them a home, showing that we don't let anybody alone. And I think this whole package is what we have to make crystal clear. We keep this package as long as it takes.
Can I just quickly ask, there's been some talk in Germany about Germany developing its own nuclear weapon, possibly on its own or in conjunction with the UK or France. Is that something that's likely to happen?
I think it's forbidden by the Unification Treaty.
Right. Oh, yes. Well, you're answering it.
Thank you. So you see the close partnership here.
He's not so keen, yeah.
I'll make one point on sanctions, because actually it's important for the press can help with this. The sanctions packages we're all passing, Britain independently, but coordinated with the EU and America. These are good. They do hit Russia in terms of the dual-use goods they want, but they're only effective if we follow them all the way around the world and check out the countries that are still producing dual-use goods for the Russian war machine. And it comes back to what Radek said, which is we've got to want this more than anything else. Yeah. So when it comes to, do you sanction the company in China? Yes, you've got to. Do you sanction the company in Turkey, as we did, a NATO ally? Yes, you've got to want it more than your bilateral relationship with any other country. And I think it's a real test for us, because otherwise they will get the goods they need from elsewhere.
Careful with the argument that the Russian economy is doing well, because GDP is a very blunt measure. Yeah. It doesn't actually reflect what's going on.
Also for 2%, by the way.
Yeah. They've lost their most lucrative market for gas, both Germany and Poland. To the UK to some extent.
We didn't have much anyway.
Right. You were getting some through France. But
that's what Putin always used to say to me. But anyway, but none now. You're right. And they've lost 1 million of their most talented people.
And they've depleted half of their national reserve budget, fund. GDP measures activity. When you stop producing consumer goods and start making tanks and shells, your GDP may rise, but you're still ruining your country.
Yes. Radek, I also wanted to ask you, just stay on this point for a bit longer, how much should Europe fear a Trump presidency? A second Trump presidency?
When you start interfering in other people's internal affairs, you're on a very slippery slope.
So you're not going to comment on this?
We prefer to remember that President Trump delivered the first Javelin anti-tank missiles to Ukraine even before the war.
Yeah. Good. Okay, just zooming out a bit, David, what kind of message what would it send to China if America doesn't pass its aid package to Ukraine?
Well, I think it sends a very bad message, because effectively, the Chinese are watching this. They are giving support to Putin, although not as much support as he would like. And I think in the arguments and discussions they're having with every country about come with us, have a relationship with us, America is unreliable, it would strengthen that argument they make in an enormous way. So I think, as I said in my very first remarks here, this is as much to me. I mean, I make this argument. I'm not trying to lecture or tell American congressmen what to do, or, that's not what it's about. I love my own country, but I love America too. I think this is really important for America, for American security. And I know that lots of people in Congress are, hugely concerned about the role of China. And if you're concerned about the role of China, you must make sure that Putin doesn't win.
Yeah, and it would be the biggest gift for Putin, and it would be the biggest gift for China at this moment.
I met with the Chinese foreign minister at the Munich Security Conference, and I told him two things. Number one, don't make us choose between you, our biggest trading partner, and the United States, our most important ally, because if we have to choose, you won't like the choice that we make. And number two, China is the country that can actually force the end of this war, because Russia cannot survive without trade with China, because it's made itself a vassal of China. Also, China could tread in the path of the United States, which became a global power rather than a hemispheric one, in 1905, with Teddy Roosevelt mediating the Portsmouth Treaty at the end of the Russo-Japanese War. We would all be grateful to China if China helped to end this war.
What did he say?
Smile.
He was inscrutable.
Sounds a bit like my meeting.
So, where do you think China stands? What do you think they want to happen? I mean, they're looking at this mess in Europe. They're thinking. What do you think they're thinking? Annalena or David? I mean, if you've got any insights.
I think they're enjoying, to an extent, the fact that we're not as united as we should be. I think that's why this American package is so important. You do that, and then you've had the EU package, the British package, the American package. We're all signing these security guarantees with Ukraine, which are important because they're basically saying if this were to happen again, we wouldn't start where we started in 2022. We'd start where we are now with massive support and equipment and training and everything else. I think it. That's why it's so important.
I think they probably feel misled by Putin, who told them it would be easy. And I hope they also see that recovering what you regard as a renegade province is harder than you think.
But obviously, I mean, this outbreak of the war was the best what could happen to China. Yeah, because Russia, as Radek has said, gave themselves totally in their hands. Europe, obviously, is totally occupied, and the Americans as well, with rescuing the peace on the European continent. So in this situation, especially in the beginning, I mean, they just watched and saw, yeah? But obviously, not only they, but the whole world saw that the consequences, as I said in the beginning, are not only affecting Europe or the transatlantic countries, but it's affecting the whole world. So we could see China within the last 2 years, always when it endangered their narrative about them being the rescuer of the world for peace and especially for equality in the whole world. So every time when it got negative for them, they interfered. And this is why for us it was also so important to make crystal clear to them, you have a responsibility. I mean, it's not only Russia, P5 Security Council member responsible for the peace in the world, violating the peace, but you're also P5 country. So you do have a responsibility. And I think this is important to always make that very clear, as Radek has that it's bilateral, as we are all doing so. So when this nuclear question came up, not only with Zaporizhzhia, but also in the beginning, yeah, I mean, there was clear messaging, and I'm really thankful to President Biden. Very clear messaging. I mean, you have to stand up now towards China. And obviously, there was some messaging. We saw this in waves, I would say, yeah. So sometimes there was messaging from China, but not always. We had the question whether there's drones or other military support. So we always have to remember China as well about their responsibility, and it works even better. And coming back to G20, and this is why in these times we shouldn't just resignate in all the fronts, but saying multilateralism can work. We had many friends and colleagues from all over the world also asking China, when we had the grain situation in the world, that Putin was using also hunger as a weapon. I mean, there were African countries calling out what's going on. So this is why the grain deal worked in the end, and now, thanks God, the Ukraine did it themselves. So, yeah. But also counting on the others, yeah, that they are also standing up. Always pressuring China on their responsibility is something, again, which we also have to do in this moment.
Yeah. So look, I know you're all here to talk about Ukraine, but obviously there's another war going on, which we should talk about as well. David, what needs to happen to bring the war in the Middle East to an end?
What needs to happen is you need to have a pause in the fighting so you can get this hostage deal done. There are talks going on in Paris right now, I think, and we desperately need that to happen. The situation in Gaza is appalling. Too many people have died. The suffering is terrible. But I think the fastest way to get the ceasefire everyone wants is actually to start with the pause, do the hostage deal. If that pause lasts for 45 days, 60 days, you then pile in every part of momentum that you can to turn it into a sustainable ceasefire without going back to fighting. That's actually the best way to get it done. Now, what does that consist of? I think it consists of all the hostages being freed. It consists of the Hamas leaders responsible for October the 7th out of Gaza. You've got to dismantle the terrorist infrastructure. You've got to give the Palestinians a new Palestinian Authority government, which is technocratic in nature but capable of governing the West Bank and Gaza. And crucially, you've got to provide a horizon, a political horizon to the Palestinian people so that they can see there is what the Saudi foreign minister, I think, rightly refers to as an unstoppable momentum towards a two-state solution. Now, that's a lot to ask for, but you've got to have, a plan. Now, maybe it won't work. Maybe you get the pause, you get the hostages, and you can't get the momentum, and then the war starts again, which would be tragic. But I think that if you get that pause, you can really pour everything in to creating that momentum. And I would say the one bright spot of this conversation we had in Munich with a lot of the Gulf countries, which Annalena brought together, and we co-chaired a meeting, was they really want to help lean in and provide some of the answers. And there are really two parts to the answer. One is, what can we do and say about creating momentum towards a Palestinian state? And secondly, what can we do to make sure Israel genuinely feels secure that October the 7th can't happen again? And those two elements are really what lies at the heart of it. So, that's my hope. And the sooner that pause comes, the better. I mean, it could happen, it could happen in days if they could get this hostage negotiation together. And that's what needs to happen.
Radek, to what extent has the Middle East war sort of confused the message or made everything more complicated around the situation in Europe?
I think it has, and in that sense, it's benefited Putin.
Right, yeah. Well, look, we've got time for some questions. If anybody would like to ask any of these foreign ministers a question, there's one over there.
Thank you very much. I'm Mark Stone from Sky News. A question for you all, if I can, or a couple of questions. First of all, it's striking that 2 years on, your message here in New York, no less, is not for Russia, but for America. I wonder why you can't get through to America the importance, as you see it, of passing the bill. And I guess, I travel around America a lot. I'm not talking about Capitol Hill. I'm talking about the American people who in quite significant numbers do not see Ukraine as a priority at all. Why can't you get through to them? That's my first question. The second question is, should you take President Trump's threat of pulling out of NATO seriously? Or is he just doing what he did before, assuming he would win the election, doing what he did before and trying to get you to pay more, specifically some continental European countries?
Take that. First of all, we're not just here to talk to America. We're at the United Nations. We're going to be talking very directly to Russia, but also to all the other countries that are there, to say why it's worthwhile continuing to back Ukraine. That this is not just about Ukraine's sovereignty and stability, not just Europe's sovereignty. It's every country in the world. What is more important to any country than a belief in your own borders, your own sovereignty, your own inviolability? And what is more dangerous than rewarding a big bullying country like Putin's Russia, being able to redraw boundaries by force and keep that territory? Every country in the world should be worried about that. So now how we get through look, I totally understand in the world we live in, with all the pressures and the difficulties of deindustrialization in some parts of our country and the pressures of illegal migration, we've all got these problems. I completely understand how difficult it is sometimes for politicians to step forward and to take these actions. And that's why I think we are trying to explain it in the best way we can, that we think this is in America's interests. We think, as Radek said, it's incredible value for money in terms of destroying, not just half of Putin's army, but half his tanks and his materiel. So we think it's good for America, but we're respectful of America's politics and how we have to try and help. There are plenty in Congress who want that argument to be won, and we've got to help them.
Well, I would say in these moments, again, it's about political leadership. I subscribe everything what David has said about the Middle East. We're working on this plan together, but we hear also there from the Israeli government, the prime minister there, but 80% of our population doesn't want to have this peace plan. Well, politics and leadership especially, it's about, when it's about peace and war, it's not about polls. Yeah, true leadership is about leading the right path, convincing your people with the best answers. We would have never German reunification We would have never European Eastern enlargement on the European continent if we would have heard at the polls, because it's normal that humans like the status quo because they never know how the future will be. They only know how the past was. So it's about, this is politics, it's all about, yeah? If you would just have a society to agree on everything on a daily basis, then we wouldn't need government. And this is why I think this argumentation about, and it doesn't matter, I mean, we have the same in Europe as well. The argumentation, we cannot do it because the polls are at the moment on this kind of situation. This is why in a democracy you have elections, couple of years. Obviously, the power is in the hand of the people when they vote, but the power, and especially the responsibility, is in the hands of those being elected. And this is why, I mean, we from outside cannot convince, obviously, the legislators here all by ourselves. But when I went, for example, to Texas in September, meeting there the Republican Abbott, speaking about the question of Ukraine, but mainly speaking about the economic relationship between Texas and the European Union, especially Texas and Germany, because we have so many trading partners there, And I was just saying, because he said we want to increase, I was happily surprised, especially on renewable energy and these kind of parts. And I said, we want to do this as well, but unfortunately, we are being very occupied with this Russian war at the moment. So our investments, they also have to go to Ukraine. So in making clear, I mean, if this war would go on like this, if the US would withdraw from NATO or for whatever military support, I mean, nothing in the world is normal again in this kind of thing. This will touch every state in the United States. This will even touch every city where we have European connections, because if the European peace order is not what it is again, I mean, nothing is normal again. And to make that clear that this is all interconnected in a globalized world, I think is of the highest importance. And I want to be crystal clear, I mean, how we have worked together in the last 2 years, I know 2 years as a foreign German minister in office, not only with our counterpart and friend Tony Blinken, but also my chancellor with the US president. I mean, in the difficult situations which we ever faced, at least in my lifetime, we were capable of giving united answers together. And this is a unique chance, and this is what we needed to push back on Putin. And I think the same goes for the Middle East. If there wouldn't be this close alignment between some European partners and the US administration to find together with the Arab world a peace plan, we will never end also this disaster, which is obviously affecting this whole world. And this only works because governments, ministers, presidents can trust each other. You shouldn't underestimate how much important for lasting relations and solutions is trust in politics. And this is why we are so thankful that we're working so closely with this current government here in the United States.
Radek, just quickly, and then we've got another question here as well.
My argument to the American people is the following, and I think it's particularly persuasive coming from New York. Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, NATO, has only been invoked once, after the 9/11 attacks on New York. Britain sent a brigade to Kandahar, Germany sent a brigade to Mazar-e-Sharif, we sent a brigade to Ghazni, a tough province. And after the mission was accomplished, whatever you think of the mission, we didn't send an invoice to Washington, because this is an alliance, and alliances are occasionally helpful to the United States too.
There's another question.
It's on Trump's threat about NATO.
I think
We even made it perfectly clear. I mean, there's no better answer than Radek has just given, I would say.
NATO is looking stronger than ever. And what I remember about President Trump is he likes winners. NATO's looking like a winner.
Question here,
Thanks very much, Julian Borgia from The Guardian.
It's a very male political view, I would say. But
We've got to try everything.
This is a question for Mr. Cameron and Ms. Baerbock. You've just been at the G20. To what extent is the Israel-Hamas war and the US refusal to call for immediate ceasefire harming your attempts to get some kind of global solidarity when it comes to isolating Russia and making sanctions work better?
I think there is an understanding. I mean, obviously there's a disagreement in the way some countries call for the immediate ceasefire and the way Annalena and I have described the pause followed by the ceasefire. I mean, fundamentally my argument is the fastest way to get a ceasefire is the way we're setting out, because use the hostage deal to get the pause, use the pause to get the ceasefire. The problem with calling for immediate ceasefire is, one, it doesn't make it happen. And two, even if it did miraculously happen, if Hamas are still in charge of Gaza, and if they still have the capability to fire rockets into Israel, it's not a lasting ceasefire. It's a ceasefire that might last a day, it might last a week. And so when you patiently explain that to those who are calling for the full-on immediate ceasefire, I think they do see that the gap between us is relatively small. And while, of course, the fact that we haven't signed up to some of these resolutions and what have you, it does do some damage, there's no doubt about that. But I think when you explain how we really want to stop the fighting right now and how we've got a plan to do it, I think that actually helps to build some faith between the Arab world and what foreign ministers like myself and Annalena are saying.
Well, again, I totally agree. Just adding, again, it's a question what you believe politics is all about. I mean, to feel good, yeah, and then you call for a ceasefire and said, I tick this box because I've called for a ceasefire, but unfortunately, just for calling for a ceasefire doesn't mean that the ceasefire is implemented. Or if you think every day and night, and this is what we have done over the last almost 4 months, so how do we come to a ceasefire? How do we come to a situation what David has described, yeah, to dismantle Hamas? Obviously, we need partners which are closer to Hamas than we are to bring them on that path. How do we come to a situation where all hostages are free? Again, this is especially with other actors. And then also, how do we come to a situation where humanitarian aid is coming in, where the horrible suffering of thousands of people in Gaza will be at least limited, and then coming to a situation where people also in Gaza can live a life in dignity. And obviously this is then our responsibility as countries which are closer to Israel, and not only to give interviews, I'm calling on them, but to work with different actors also in Israel to come to this so crucial pause. We need this pause now. We need the hostage deal, including freeing the hostages, and the entry and full entry of humanitarian into Gaza. And this is what we are working on day and night. And again, the good thing is, I mean, we are more united, especially with partners in the Arab world, than maybe over Christmas. Unfortunately, I would say after the 7th of October, there could have been a momentum as well where this plan, which we are working on, could have been implemented. But I would say at that moment, some were not ready to call on Hamas. Then we missed other moments, and that's how life is. Now we are in this moment, and now we have to take, I mean, we have only a couple of few weeks left, and we have to use this weeks. And this is, I think, why we're also here all together, not only with regard to Ukraine, but also having the talks here at the United Nations to end the horrible suffering in Gaza, but also to end the horrible suffering of more than 100 people still in the hands of Hamas.
Well, we will have to wrap it up there, but thank you to this impressive troika of foreign ministers. I know you're all exhausted.
We have the great troika, the Weimar Triangle, France, Poland and Germany, and we would love to be a quartet soon again.
Well, listen, I know you're all exhausted because you've been flying all over the world, Brazil, Munich, the Falkland Islands. But anyway, thank you for coming here, and good luck with your endeavours, and come back again to see us.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.